this is something that I see chiropractors neglecting this all of the time. Thomas Edison had a quote that says, "Many of life's failures are people who did not realize just how close they were to success when they gave up." Now, if we're running a marathon, then literally every kilometre along the way, it tells us we're one closer, 1, 2, all the way up to 42. We're seeing progress, and progress is a really great fuel for motivation. One of the most famous and cautionary tales of not tracking progress comes from a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And he tells a story in there about a guy by the name of Darby and his gold mine. Now, during the gold rush, Darby and his uncle invested heavily in a mining operation. They struck gold early on, were super excited about it, but after some time, the gold veins seemed to dry up. Now, Darby was convinced that they had failed, so they gave up and they sold their mining equipment. Now, not long after that, a man purchased the mine. He hired an expert to measure the progress that they'd made, and he discovered that Darby and his team were literally 3 feet away from the richest gold veins ever found. The lesson here is simple. If Darby had measured his progress, he would have known that it was closer than he thought. We need to, as chiropractors, be measuring our progress. If you're not looking at your progress as we move forwards there too, it's really hard to stay motivated. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. Got a quick question for you. Have you ever had weeks in practice where you literally feel unstoppable, and others, even when the smallest of tasks or hurdles come along, you feel like you literally could not get over it? This is the frustrating thing about motivation. It's often incredibly unreliable. Some days you're fully in control, you're fired up to help your patients, grow your practice, and create an enormous amount of impact. And other days, you're literally dragging yourself through the motions and wondering where all the drive went. What if I told you that motivation isn't something that you find, that it's something that you create? And that's exactly what we're going to unpack in today's episode. Now, motivation, this was a training I went into in great detail with my community influencer members recently. We did a deep dive training on emotional intelligence, and this is a concept that was really first brought to light by a guy by the name of Daniel Goleman. He wrote a book back in 1995 called Emotional Intelligence and how it often out-trumps IQ. Up until then, we thought a lot of life success and business success was built in around smarts, how smart you were. And he really showed, because Goldman's background is in a science, right, as a scientist, and he's a psychiatrist as well. He showed that a better predictor of a business's success, their income, their enjoyment, how long they kept their staff for, was actually emotional intelligence. The good thing about emotional intelligence is that we can actually learn it. Now, Goldman talks about there being 5 components in his book. He talks about self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation that we're going to talk about today, empathy, and social skills. Now, chiropractors who consistently create a culture of motivation, they grow their practices faster, they enjoy practice more, and they lead their teams better. Motivation is not about waiting for inspiration. It's about setting up the right conditions to stay engaged, even when times feel tough, because they will feel tough. The big mistake that chiropractors make is thinking that motivation is the initiator. They think that it comes first, as opposed to motivation being the end result of other circumstances. We're going to talk a lot about what those other circumstances are. In fact, let's jump into it now. There are 3 building blocks, or major building blocks, of motivation. We can put several others inside of this too. Now, the first one I want to talk about here is mindset, okay? And this mindset is realizing that motivation is internal, not external. So if you've ever found yourself wishing for motivation, I have a lot of times. If you felt envious of somebody else's drive and wondered, how do they stay so motivated? Have you ever told yourself, I would do it if only I were motivated? These are all thoughts and a belief system that kind of buy into the idea that motivation is something external. It's a myth that motivation is something that you find rather than something that you create, okay? So, again, we tell ourselves, I need to feel inspired before I take action. I'm just not naturally motivated person. I hear that all of the time. Or maybe I just need a break and the motivation will come back. The truth is, motivation isn't found, it's generated, okay? So think about exercise, for instance. Often, many of us had times when, particularly if you're in a regular exercise, we don't feel like we're motivated to begin with. Again, I get up and exercise early in the mornings, and several mornings a week, I don't feel like doing it, but I get out, I put my shoes on, I either go to the gym, exercise, or down to the beach. And once I start moving, my energy builds and my motivation builds. The same is true with practice growth, with marketing, with leadership, with caring for your patients. Action comes first, and motivation is what follows, okay? So the key thing to think about then is, how do I take action when motivation is low? Because we can kind of get into this circle here. I'm not motivated to take action to get motivation, okay? There are several things. Now, purpose, which we're going to cover next, is one major driver. But before we tap into that, there are 4 ways that you can generate the energy and the drive to get moving in the first place. And the first one is just clarity. You need to know what you want and why it matters. If you don't know what success looks like, it's really hard to take action towards it. If a goal feels way too vague or overwhelming, it's hard to start, okay? So the solution for this is get really crystal clear about what you're working to. And even it's in small ways. Instead of, I need to work on my marketing, it's, I'm going to post 1 video this week. The concept I'm going to work on my marketing is vague. What does success look like? But I'm going to post 1 video this week is really clear. That will help with motivation, okay? So start with small, clear actions, okay, or small, clear sort of outcomes that you want to go to, and that'll help to remove some of the mental resistance as well. The second is really about priming your body and your mind for action. So you might notice that it's much harder to be productive when you're tired, when you're sluggish, or when you're mentally foggy, okay? Sometimes you don't need motivation. You just need movement, okay? You need to stand up, take a deep breath, change your physical state before getting into it. Like, I'm a huge Tony Robbins fan, and I have been doing his work since I started in chiropractic. He talks about those power moves to fire up our physiology. Walk around, stretch, drink of water. Small shifts in your energy can often create the desire to get up and get moving. If possible, just start with something small and easy. A really quick little thing to get you up and going. Maybe some deep breaths. The third thing that really often helps us with some action is lower the friction, make it easier to start. We often resist starting when it feels like it's super complicated. So in exercise, they often talk about, make sure you get your exercise gear out the night before. This is something I always do. It's always out. My runners, my shoes, my clothes, they're out in the other room, so I don't have to organize that in the morning, okay? A lot of the time, it's not that we're unmotivated. It's just that we're overwhelmed. So if we can get things started, I was listening to a guy recently who wanted to learn how to play the guitar, but he was never practicing. So he sat the guitar in the middle of his lounge room where he would walk past it multiple times a day, and he found himself just picking up and playing it. So again, we need to make sure that we lower the friction and make it much easier for us to start. The fourth thing that can be really helpful with this is just a simple identity shift. Like, just start to act like the person who you want to become. So when motivation is low, tap into a new identity. Instead of waiting to take action, act like the future version of you. Ask yourself, I do this all the time. What would future Angus do? Would the Angus that is successful at this, how would he behave in this situation? What would the truly motivated version of me do in this scenario as well, okay? So realize, motivation, okay, is something that we generate, but in many cases what we need to do is that we need to, grease the chute, so to speak. We need to make it easier for ourselves. And that moves us on to the second ingredient of motivation, and that is purpose, okay? He who has the biggest why can bear almost any how. That was a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche as well. If you've ever struggled to stay motivated, but you found it easy to step in when somebody else needs help, you already understand the power of purpose. As humans, we need to take advantage of the fact that we're wired to push beyond our limits when we believe our actions serve something bigger than ourselves. Okay, think about it. We see this in our community all the time with police officers and soldiers who risk their lives, not for personal gain. It's not like they're getting huge money out of it all, but they do it because they believe in protecting others. Okay, parents, okay, we work late, we juggle responsibility, we sacrifice a whole bunch of things for our kids, not because it's easy, because we're driven by our love for them as well, okay? In healthcare, many of us are working long hours, we're dealing with challenges, we keep showing up day after day because we believe in helping people, okay? When your purpose is clear, motivation becomes easier, okay? Not easy, but easier. No longer are you trying to force yourself to act. It's almost like there's a magnet that pulls you forward. So one of the most compelling examples of the power of purpose comes from Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. During his time in a concentration camp, What he observed is that the survivors weren't necessarily the strongest physically, but they were the ones who had the deepest sense of purpose, okay? For Frankl, his purpose and his meaning and his reason to get through those concentration camps was twofold. He wanted to share his message in around the importance of meaning, and he wanted to reunite with his wife. That's what got him through a living hell day after day, month after month, year after year. To believe in something bigger than himself is what gave him the strength, and we need to piggyback on this as well. So how do you go about searching for your own purpose? Okay, now most of us started out in chiropractic not just because we wanted to earn a great income and because it was great hours. We started off, there was a story we told ourselves. But often over time, because of stress and routine and business pressures, it tends to cloud that purpose. It makes it harder for us to stay motivated. And if motivation is low, it's often because purpose is no longer clear or strong enough. So let's talk about some ways to help you reconnect with your purpose. So look beyond yourself, okay? It's often not motivating enough for us to see 2, 3, 4, 500 people a week. But go back to, what is this about? Who are you serving? Who is it benefits from you being your best? What impact does it have on their health, their confidence, their future as well? And if you disappeared tomorrow, what gap would be left? Now, for some of us, we might be tempted to say, well, no one really benefits from my work, and, do I really make that much of a difference? And if I did disappear tomorrow, would people really notice? Now, if the answer to that is no, then it's time for you to go, well, what kind of a difference would I like to make? Like, who would I like to benefit from my work? What sort of impact would I like to have on people's health, their confidence in their future? And what would I like it to be if I did disappear in 12 months from now? What would I like that gap to be? Define your why. What is it that gets you out of bed? Again, why were you a chiropractor in the first place? What moments in your career, many of us had those interactions with practice members where it was just like, this is why I do what I do, okay? What are the things that can make your working week feel meaningful every day, okay? So, something for you to reflect on. If you had unlimited energy and motivation, what would you be working towards? What would you like it to be as well? So connect with a bigger vision. Part of this can be imagining, what would you like your practice to be 5 years from now? What sort of impact do you want to be making? What kind of a chiropractor, a leader, a person do you want to be, okay? You could think about writing down with just one sentence, a purpose statement that excites you. I help families unlock their health so they can thrive in life. If that's what we do, okay, this will help to motivate you. So some final thoughts. When you connect your why with what you do, motivation will take care of itself. If your work feels routine or exhausting, revisit your purpose, okay? If you feel stuck in a slump, focus on who you serve and why it matters. When your purpose is clear, then motivation is something that really follows. Now, the third ingredient of motivation is progress. And this is something that I see chiropractors neglecting this all of the time, okay? Thomas Edison had a quote that says, many of life's failures are people who did not realize just how close they were to success when they gave up. Now, if we're running a marathon, then literally every kilometer along the way, it tells us we're one closer, 1, 2, all the way up to 42. We're seeing progress, and progress is a real great fuel for motivation. Now, one of the most famous and cautionary tales of not tracking progress comes from a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. If you haven't read that, you should. It's a classic as well. And he tells a story in there about a guy by the name of Darby and his gold mine. Now, during the gold rush, Darby and his uncle invested heavily in a mining operation. They struck gold early on, were super excited about it, but after some time, the gold veins seemed to dry up. Okay, costs were going up. There was no revenue coming back in. They kept on digging, but with no visible progress. Eventually frustration set in. Does this sound familiar? We do things day in and day out. When it doesn't feel like there's progress there too, we're likely to think that we want to stop or that we're failing. Now, Darby was convinced that they had failed, so they gave up and they sold their mining equipment and they walked away. Now, not long after that, a man purchased the mine. He hired an expert to measure the progress that they'd made, and he discovered that Darby and his team were literally 3 feet away from the richest gold veins ever found. The lesson here is simple. If Darby had measured his progress, he would have known that it was closer than he thought. We need to, as chiropractors, be measuring our progress. If you're not looking at your progress as we move forwards there too, it's really hard to stay motivated. Now, what tends to happen, this is a natural way for our brains to think, is as we move forwards, our goals are a little bit like the horizon. It continues to push forwards at the same rate. Now, when we measure progress, it's like looking in the rear vision mirror. Okay, we look in the rear vision mirror, we can see what we've been past. We can see the things that we've all checked off along the way. Now, again, too many chiropractors give up on a marketing strategy, a patient outreach strategy, or a practice goal because they're not seeing immediate results as well. If they had been measuring both objective and subjective progress, I'm going to talk about these in a moment, many times they would have realized that there are only a few adjustments away from, a breakthrough, the goals, okay? So we need to make sure we do this. Now, there are two types of progress that we need to measure. I just touched on those before. They are objective and subjective. And it really is important that you measure both of these because either on their own won't give you the full picture of progress. The first is objective measures. These are really measurable. They're tangible. I could look at them and see them. They're often numbers as well. So they might be things like, new patients per month, higher bank balance, a cash flow, increased patient retentions, more referrals, improved conversion rates. They're really easy to measure and we should be looking at these. Because if we're implementing changes into our practice, it might be difficult to have new communication strategies. It might be hard working through your initial consultation and your report of findings. And if we're seeing, hang on, my retention is going up, my conversion is going up there too, then this fuels us to stay motivated, okay? So again, these sorts of objective measures there are clear. They're fact-based signs that the practice is growing, okay? They help to build confidence because you're seeing evidence that you're doing the right thing. If motivation is low, then often what we need to do is go back and check these things, okay? So question for you. What is one objective progress marker that you can start to track this month that might help to fuel you with motivation? Now, the second thing that you need to be doing is tracking subjective progress. These are momentum builders, okay? These are things, sometimes they're called, I think it's lacking indicators. That is, they take time before we actually see the results. So it might be things like, I'm feeling more energized and excited about work. Now, that might not come across as a change in our stats, but if you're feeling more excited and energized about work and you do that for 2 or 3 weeks in a row, that will come across, okay? It might be increased confidence with your patient interactions. Again, you're not going to necessarily see changes in your numbers today with that. Maybe you're getting more positive patient testimonials. Maybe you're growing relationships. So perhaps this last month, you introduced and you built 5 new referral partners with other practitioners and businesses in your area. Again, these lagging indicators, I think that was a word I was trying to get to before, these lagging indicators often don't show up in our objective measures right away, okay? Smoother team operations, better leadership, okay? We want to make sure that we're checking in on both these. Sometimes these are called kind of hard numbers and then soft numbers as well. We want to make sure that we're looking at those too. Now, those soft numbers that we talked about before there as well, or subjective progress, they're important, as I said, because they're early indicators. Feeling more confident in your patient conversions will eventually lead to higher retention, okay? Building stronger referrals will eventually lead to, patient growth later on as well. So what's one sign of progress that you've noticed recently? If you were to look back on it, what is one sign, okay? And again, if you haven't got one, what could you start to look for? What will help you there as well? So again, make sure that you're not just tracking financial growth, make sure you're celebrating small wins, okay? Use progress as fuel as well. So final thought. Progress creates momentum. If you're lacking motivation, then it probably tells me that you're not actually measuring progress. If you feel stuck, stop and look for signs, okay? Look in the rear vision mirror. They might be big things or they might be small ones. If things are tough, focus on one small win at a time, okay? Now, when you see progress in any form, motivation will start to build. Now, even with all of these things in place, there are still motivation killers. So we've all had days where everything felt the same, your energy was low, and like you were just going through the motions, okay? There are things that get in the way of us being motivated, and I call these motivation killers. And I'm going to share 3 of these with you now. The first one is just called routine fatigue, okay? This is feeling stuck in repetition and exhaustion, okay? Now, routine fatigue is very real. It's going to have a huge impact on your motivation, and it tends to show up in one of 2 ways, or often both these ways, okay? It's important that we separate these, okay? The first is a mental and emotional burnout. So you're not just bored, you're exhausted. You need rest, not more effort. It's not motivation at this time. You need rest and a holiday. And the second is repetitive work feels stale. Even though you love things, it can feel monotonous, okay? It lacks variety. Now, both these types drain motivation, and the solutions for them are different. So let's talk about the solutions. When you genuinely feel fatigued, you need rest, not more effort. This is not a motivation problem that you have, okay? You need to take a holiday. You need to take a long weekend. You need to get back to, really good habits of looking after yourself. Now, this happens because we push too hard and too long without recovery. Mental exhaustion is mistaken for motivation I talked about before. Your body and your brain are telling you to recharge. So this is about taking strategic breaks. Again, it doesn't mean that we need 4, 6, 8 weeks off. A long weekend, if spent properly, can be incredibly rejuvenating. One of the things that I often used to do is I worked Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I'd take the Thursday and the Monday off. So I could have virtually a week off in between there, and I would find I'd have a busier week beforehand and a busier week afterwards, and my patient volume would only drop by about 10 or 15% because of that. And I had lots of these. I would try and throw one of these in at least every 6 weeks, okay? So find times in that. And again, if you're taking time off, you need to make sure that you're not getting home and then continuing to exhaust yourself. So what is it that will recharge your batteries? Think about it. When was the last time you took a real break? Is your lack of motivation from exhaustion, okay? Is it from overwork, or is it really a motivation problem? For many of you, it's just that you're exhausted, okay? Now, the second part of this is just repetition. And in this situation, we need to introduce variety. There's a lot of repetition in what we do. We work the same days, the same hours. We see many similar sorts of people coming into us. That repetition sometimes can lead to boredom. All right. So doing the same thing over and over again makes even the most meaningful work sometimes uninspiring. Now, our brain craves novelty. Now, without it, motivation is going to fade. So your routines might be efficient, but perhaps they're lacking energy. So there's several ways that you can go about doing this. And, several things I've built into my daily routine to change this. I never drove to work the same way 2 days in a row. So, Monday I would go this way, Wednesday I would go another way, Thursday, and I'd often go home a different way than what I went. I wanted to add novelty and difference in there. We made sure that we listened to different music. Several times a year we would just have fun celebrations at work. When it came around to chiropractic's birthday, we would dress up. Often we'd get in kind of, clothes of the era, 1895. We would have summer holiday parties, and we would do that in the middle of winter where we would come in our bathers. And this would be not only novelty for us, but it'd be novelty for the patients as well. So we would change things inside of our practice regularly. So our posters, we rotated around the walls. When was the last time you moved some furniture, bought some new furniture, gave your practice a lick of paint? All of these things help to bring some novelty and variety back into your practice. Now, it's not about drastic or dramatic changes, although some of you might need that. It might be time to blow your practice up and start again. Learn a new skill, refine a technique, or set a fun short-term goal. But we need to make sure that we have variety and novelty. Without this, okay, we're going to feel stuck. We're going to feel bored, okay? So is your fatigue, is it becoming from repetition, or is it coming from the fact that you're just tired as well? So if you're exhausted, you need a rest. If you're stagnant, you need variety as well. So barrier number 2. So now we're going through the barriers that get in the way of motivation. This is just setbacks and slumps. It's navigating the lows without losing momentum, okay? So it's important to realize this. Setbacks and slumps are normal. Progress isn't predictable. It's never linear as well. Now, we expect progress to be steady and predictable, but real progress happens in waves. There are going to be times in your practice that it's quieter, within a shift, within a week, within a month as well. Slow months, failed marketing attempts, patient drop-offs, they don't mean that you're failing. They're just part of the process. It's what continues to happen, and it continued to happen throughout my entire 23, 24 years of practice, and it continues to happen in our Lara practice now. This is just what happens. Every successful chiropractor has gone through seasons where things didn't seem to be working. So we need to make sure that we have strategies to reframe this, okay? We need to zoom out. A rough week or a rough month doesn't define your practice. It's just a small piece of a bigger picture as well. We need to ask ourselves, if I look back in this moment from a year from now, how would I see it differently? In many cases, not even a year. If I look back in this a week from now or a month from now, we can see it very different. Recognize also that sticking with something through the dips is what separates success from struggle. It's at this time now, we need to really make sure that we're staying motivated. So we need to go back to those building blocks that we talked about beforehand, knowing that motivation is something that we generate, reminding ourselves of our why, these are the things, and making sure that we're tracking our progress, okay? So the second thing we can do is that we can reframe the setback. And the statement I really love here is it's not failure, it's just feedback. When something doesn't work, whether it be a Facebook ad or a marketing plan or a patient dropped off, it's easy to label it as a failure. But that thinking there really slows us down, okay? What we want to do is say, it's feedback. How can we learn from this? We can ask ourselves questions. Why didn't this work? How can I do it better next time, okay? Just because a Facebook ad doesn't work or didn't work this time doesn't mean it won't work next time, okay? Every failed attempt gives us clues. It gives us insight into what will succeed in the future. And the way that people get better is from feedback, all right? If our child, when they learnt to walk, if the first time they fell over and said, this isn't for me, they would never have walked. We cheered when the failure came about there too. We supported, we cheered, we were there to support them through this as well, okay? So if you think of a past setback, what did you learn from it? How did it help you improve? Or what could have you have learned from it? The other thing that can really help when there's setbacks and struggle is the 24-hour rule. This is about feeling it and then moving it on. So when inevitably those setbacks happen, emotions are going to cloud judgment, okay? Frustration often turns into doubt, and doubt leads to bad decisions. We never make good decisions from doubt, okay? And often what happens is we as chiropractors, we react way too quickly. We make drastic changes from a place of stress instead of from a place of strategy. So you want to give yourself 24 hours. It's okay to feel frustrated, disappointed, or upset. This happens to most of us on a weekly basis, okay? But we just don't want to stay in that. And when we get really good at this, we can hang out there for a few minutes, maybe an hour or two, but you've got up to 24 hours. And then it's time to shift into problem-solving mode, okay? So we want to wait before making major decisions. If you're feeling frustrated, okay, if you're discouraged, is there a dip in patient numbers, okay, don't immediately scrap your marketing strategy. Analyze what's actually happening first. Focus on what the next step is there too, okay? Another thing to think about here is just focus on small wins. Shrink the game right down, okay? A slump can feel like you're stuck in quicksand. The more you struggle, the harder it gets. But the bigger the problem looks, the harder it is to kind of get out of there, okay? So shrink things down. Stop thinking about the big thing. What little thing? Instead of trying to fix an entire marketing campaign, what one thing could I do? Could I just send a text message to a patient? Instead of worrying about slow growth, perhaps you could just post one video today. Progress starts with small winnable actions that create momentum, okay? So again, a reflection question is this. What's one small win that you could focus on today to move you forwards, all right? So again, we need to make sure that we're reframing through all of this. So here's some final thoughts there as well. Every setback is a setup for success. So if you're feeling stuck, zoom out. Recognize that setbacks are normal. If you experience failure, reframe it. Feedback and adjust as well. If your emotions are running high, take 24 hours before reacting. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, shrink the game down and focus on small, winnable things. Now, the third and final barrier to motivation is just simply this, a lack of clear goals. If there's no direction, there's no motivation, okay? So setting small goals or setting goals is the first step of turning the invisible into the visible. That was a quote from Tony Robbins there too, okay? So if you don't know exactly what you're working towards, it's super easy to feel unmotivated, okay? Vague goals like, I want to grow my practice. First of all, that's not a goal, okay? They don't create urgency and they don't create excitement. So without clear milestones, it's really hard to know if you're making progress. And we talked before about the importance of progress and motivation. So how do we go about fixing it? First is this, define specific, exciting goals that give you direction, all right? So your goals should be measurable. Maybe it's something like this year we want to help 100 new families, okay? Again, instead of growing my practice, 100 new families. It's easy to measure. Did you do it or not? When we have a clear target, it makes it also not only easier for us to measure, it makes it much easier for us to take action. Okay, and remember, it's action that actually fuels motivation as well. We want to break it down. Okay, often the big goals, and even that one like 100 new families, they need micro steps. Okay, otherwise it gets overwhelming. So if you don't know what the next step is, motivation is going to fade. One little step. How do I move towards it? And again, the next step, we don't have to guarantee it's the right thing. We just have to do something because we're going to learn from it. Because when we get failure, it's just feedback. So again, how do we fix this? Break big goals into small, doable actions. Ask, what's the next thing that I need to do? Focus on daily or weekly wins to build momentum as well, okay? The third thing is, again, we need to track progress because we talked about this before, because visibility creates motivation. This is how we deal with these slumps and setbacks as we go forwards. So, final thought. Clarity creates action. If motivation is low, if your goals aren't clear enough, then we have to bring clarity to them. If your goal feels too big, break it into micro steps. And if progress feels slow, then start tracking things as you go forwards. All right, let's wind all of this up as well. So You do not have to be motivated to take action, okay? It's action that creates motivation. We've covered what truly drives motivation and why it's something that you create, not something that you wait for. So let's do a quick recap. There are 3 motivational building blocks. They are mindset, they are purpose, and they are progress, okay? So take a moment to think about this. Which of these areas needs your attention right now? Is it just the idea that, I'm looking for motivation outside of myself? Is it I don't have a big enough purpose, or am I not measuring progress? And how could you start to move towards that this week? Remember, there'll be 3 motivational barriers that'll get in the way of sustained motivation. They are routine fatigue. Are you exhausted, okay, or are you stuck in repetition? Is there a setback and a slump? Remember, progress isn't linear, okay? We need to reframe failures as feedback. We now need to allow ourselves time to get over the emotions there as well. And again, we have a lack of clear goals. Without clarity, motivation is going to fade as well, okay? So which of these barriers is holding you back the most? And what's one shift you can make this week to move through it? Now, this is not about you having to overcome all of these all at once, because again, that could be overwhelming. But pick one thing from today's training. What am I going to work on? Is it a building block? Is it a barrier as well? Okay. Again, it could be just a clear goal for the next 90 days. It could be starting to track progress. What is it going to be? Remember, motivation is what follows action. All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. Your community desperately needs you implementing, understanding this, because it's a motivated chiropractor that's able to make impact in their community. It's a motivated chiropractor that grows a bigger practice, a bigger and more enjoyable practice. As always, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives, and I look forward to seeing you back here next week. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.